Luke chapter 16 tonight, down in verse 19, just a minute. Also going to look at the first part, at least, of chapter 17. I think it's a story that probably most, not all of us, are familiar with, Rich Man and Lazarus. And then, of course, Jesus has some words about, well, he talks a little bit about sin and talks about faith, and then, of course, what our duty is as servants of God. First question, though, is kind of a think about it question. It really has to do with the second part of the lesson more than the first, if you're kind of wondering when we get into the Rich Man and Lazarus. But the question is, what expectations do we usually have whenever we help somebody? Do you say we have expectations whenever we help someone?
Depends on who we're helping.
Okay, that's probably true. And what do you mean by that?
Well, I think like when I'm helping mom and dad, I don't expect anything in return or even really a thank you all the time. It's just part of being the son, and they're getting older. It's my job to step up and help them out.
Okay. I think that's
versus like just someone asking for help or me jumping somewhere like in a grocery store because someone can't reach something off the top shelf. I mean, it's just different.
okay. Anybody else have anything?
Well, he's right. I mean, think about, like, you're at work, you do your job, you're fine, but you do a little extra, you help your boss. It's not because you want to go fishing with him on Saturday. It's because you want to raise. Versus, even in the grocery store, you see a little lady who can't reach the top shelf, you reach up and you get down for her, you're not expecting nothing, you don't know her name. But, yeah, there are situations where it's like networking. You help them because you know they're going to be helpful later.
Yeah, I think there's various reasons why a person can help somebody else. You brought up an interesting idea. Go ahead, Susie.
I think most of all it's just appreciation.
I think that's what we expect, don't we? I mean, realistically, as a human, if you go out of your way to help somebody, I think you would be nice, wouldn't it? I think probably in our society, we probably think, well, the least they could do is say thank you. But David brought up an interesting point, because how many of us, whenever we just do what our job is, expect the thank you? Is there anybody here that does that? Why not?
What's in your job description? So I mean,
it's what's expected from you, right? You're not going out of your way. You're not going above the call of duty, so to speak, right? You're doing what you're supposed to be doing and what you're getting paid to do. And so you don't really expect anybody to come along and say, hey, thanks for doing your job. Here's your paycheck. And Jesus kind of uses that idea for us as Christians. I think sometimes as Christians, we think, maybe we're, I don't know what the right word is. I'm going to say overly engaged, but I don't know if that's the right word to use to describe it or not. But let's just say that there's a day that comes along where we do more than what we normally do for Christ. What do you think we would feel like?
Feel good about myself.
I think we would, don't you? I mean, that's generally how I feel. I mean, just being honest. When you go above what you normally do, you kind of feel good, right? Kind of think, well, I did great today, Jesus kind of uses that idea, though, to what should our attitude be as servants of Christ? Do we ever do overly over what we should do? Is that ever the case as Christians? No. Because what is our duty to do? Serve. Whatever God tells us to do, right? In whatever manner. And however many opportunities come up to take advantage of that. And so I think we have to be careful as Christians that we don't kind of, carry those expectations over with us into Christianity. Sometimes we're just doing, all the time, we're just doing what we're supposed to be doing, right? As servants of God. So we'll talk about that, Lord willing, a little bit later. But again, sometimes those human and divine expectations get a little bit mixed up. So let's talk about the story of the rich man and Lazarus, found there in Luke 16 and beginning verse 19 through verse 31. Again, I think most, if not all of us, are familiar. If you need to brush up, you can kind of read over it while we're going through these questions here. But the first question, really, when you think about these two individuals, the rich man and Lazarus, there's a tremendous contrast in about everything that they do and everything about them. And I want to talk a little bit about that contrast. First of all, their contrast in lifestyle. So when the Bible describes to us this rich man, or when Jesus is telling this story about this rich man, what are some of the things, the characteristics that Jesus mentions about this rich man? How does he describe him?
We would today, he's living the high life.
He's living in luxury, isn't he? And how do we know that? What are some of the things that Jesus mentions there? Yeah, that has to do with expensive clothes, right? So generally speaking, people who have money wear expensive clothes, don't they? I mean, generally speaking, I know there's some exceptions to the rule, but if a person has a lot of wealth in the United States of America, do they just kind of sweep that under a rug and hide it? Not let that be known in any way? No, generally, it's flaunted, isn't it? You know, the idea that people have a lot of money is really something that they want the public to see and to recognize, and whenever they think about their name, to associate themselves with. I don't think this guy was any different. You know, he was a guy with a lot of money, and he liked to show his money off. He liked to wear fine clothes. What are some other things we read about?
Very sumptuously every day. We could put that into more than just food, though. That could be the car you ride in, the house you're driving home to, you know, all that stuff.
Yeah, and there's several ways that would manifest itself. One of the things you mentioned was food, and I know, again, it's like you said, it's more than just food. But the poor man was waiting for what? He's waiting for the scraps off the rich man's table, wasn't he? So the picture is his table is spilling over here. You know, this idea of food is everywhere. And so was he a healthy man?
No.
I'm talking about the rich man.
Well, I mean, he may have been obese.
Okay, well, I would say.
Let's be honest, if you have that kind of money and you don't have to work and your table's overflowing, there's a fair chance that you might be eating more than you ought to.
Okay, that could be.
And I'm not throwing rocks in that glass house, I swear.
Yeah, that could be true. But I mean, generally speaking, there's nothing to indicate that his health was failing, is there? Nothing to indicate that he was lacking physically in any way. So you have this picture really of success. You have this picture of physical success and physical prosperity and physical health. And then, let's just stop right there and kind of think about this. Generally speaking, when a person is in the position like this rich man is, what are some attitudes that they display?
I work for what I got. It's mine.
Okay, so how would you describe that? What's a good way to describe it? Pride? Okay, pride would be a good way. Generally speaking, they're proud individuals, aren't they? What else? Arrogance? Yeah. Person who has a lot of money, maybe has a little bit of a persona of arrogance around them. Anything else? Selfishness? Yeah, that's generally associated with not everybody who's rich, but generally speaking, those who are rich are pretty greedy individuals, aren't they? They're pretty covetous, they're pretty selfish. Any other things? I think those are about all that I had. So, you know, you think about this rich man, is he any different than rich men are today? No. So he's a modern day rich man. So you have this lifestyle of a man who's living in luxury, and then you have again, a contrast. You have on the opposite end of scale the life of Lazarus. And so how is Lazarus described in the Bible? Or what are some things we can kind of deduce from reading about him even?
He's a beggar.
Okay, he's a beggar, so do you think he has any money or very much money? No. Generally, people who have money aren't beggars, right? But he's a guy who's in a difficult situation, and why is he begging?
Health problems.
He's disabled, isn't he? I mean, he has genuine health problems. Can he go out and work? Can he go out and hold down a normal job like anybody else would? How does he get to the rich man's gates? Okay, so that indicates somebody had to move him, right? He couldn't move himself. Either he didn't have the strength or he didn't have the physical capability of moving himself. So he's in a very helpless situation. And of course, a person in that situation is reduced to begging in order to survive in that day and age. So he was poor, he was disabled. The Bible also describes his body as being full of sores. Not only that, but he was, I think, so physically frail and helpless that the dogs would come along and lick those sores, and evidently he couldn't even fight the dogs off. You know, that's how bad of a situation that he was in. What was he doing, though, sitting where he was?
Looking for crumbs.
Yeah, he was waiting for the crumbs or the leftovers to come off the rich man's table, right? That's all he wanted. That's all the Bible says he desired that. Does it say that he got it? No, but that's what he was hoping to get, wasn't it? That's what his desire was, and that was his reason for being there. So there's a tremendous contrast in the way that these two men lived and their lives here upon this earth. There's also a contrast in this story in their deaths. When you read about the death of the rich man, how does the Bible describe that to us?
He was buried.
Yeah, he died and he was buried. I mean, that's about as simple and straightforward of a explanation that you can get about somebody's death, right? They died and they were buried. But whenever it talks about the death of Lazarus, there's a different persona that exists around the events of his death. So you think about how does the Bible describe Lazarus' death to us?
Carried Abraham's bosom.
Yeah, he was carried into Abraham's bosoms, and particularly, how did he get there?
Angels.
Yeah, the angels. You read question number 3 here. What role did the angels play in this story? Well, they were the ones who took the spirit of Lazarus to paradise, weren't they? So when he was physically here upon this earth, people had to carry him. They had to move him around, get him from place to place. After he died, spiritually speaking, the angels picked him up and carried his spirit, his soul, to the realm of Hades and into the place that's called paradise. And so you have a picture. You know, a lot of times I think as human beings we're interested in the concept of death and in really what happens for a faithful child of God after death. But I think this is a great picture of it. Sometimes when we think about death, we think about people, being alone. But that's not the Bible, the concept that the Bible teaches for a faithful Christian. For a faithful Christian, angels are literally standing by their side, waiting to carry their soul away. So the moment that our spirit departs from our body, those angels pick us up and they carry us into the realm of paradise in Hades. And so it's again a great contrast between what happens to these individuals at the time of their death. You go on, you read the rest of the story. Of course, there's a tremendous contrast in where they're spending eternity, right? In their eternal dwelling places. So you think about this rich man, you think about all these blessings and these opportunities and the prosperity that he enjoyed in this life. And the question number 4 is this: what difference did the rich man's wealth make in his eternal destiny? Would you say that his wealth made a difference in his eternal destiny?
I say yes.
I think you can say yes and no, right? So in yes, in what sense? Yeah, a negative way, right? Did it have an impact on where he was dwelling eternally? Well, the way he used it did it? Or the way, I guess we should say, the way he didn't use it, because that's That's really what he was guilty of. And, you know, it's one of those things that as Christians is kind of scary to us, but did he beat up Lazarus? Is that why he was in a place of punishment? You know, did he kick him around? Did he hurt him in any way? Well, why was he there?
He did nothing to help.
Didn't help, right? Just didn't help the helpless. And so he had the opportunity, walk by this guy every day, had the opportunity to help him, and he just didn't do it. And so that contributed, the lack of using his wealth and his blessings and his possessions that God gave him to help those in need, contributed to his eternal dwelling place.
It wasn't the money that put him in hell, it was the love of it, right?
Exactly, yeah.
That's the root of it, is the love. He loved it more than he loved helping those other people obeying God.
Yeah, so there is a sense in which his wealth did affect his eternal destiny, right? Because it, like you said, it wasn't the money itself that put him there. Money itself isn't inherently good or evil. You know, you look at a $20 bill, is it good or evil? Well, neither, right? Can you use it for good? Yeah. Can you use it for evil? Yeah. So it's kind of our will and our determination and our choices contribute to whether that money is a positive thing in our hands or whether it's a negative thing. Yes, sir.
I have a question. So it says that the rich man went to hell.
Yeah.
And Lazarus went to paradise.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what the original language is, but when they say hell here, are they referring to actual hell, final destination for sinners, or are they referring to something that's like purgatory-ish?
Yeah, so the Greek word is the word Hades, and it's the word hell, eternal hell, as it's used in the New Testament, is the Greek word Gehenna. And so there's a difference in eternal hell, and there's a difference in this place where he's dwelling that's a place of punishment. And I think we'll see that as we go along here in the story a little bit more. But this is Hades, and Hades was like, to the Greeks, it was like this unseen spiritual realm. So, and I think what we find out whenever we study the pages of the Bible is it's a temporary place for the spirits and the souls of men who have departed this life to dwell until the judgment day. And part of the reason that we know that is when you turn over to Revelation chapter 20, you read there in verse 13, and again, I'm reading from the New King James Version. One of the things that it does is it differentiates that Greek word. So wherever the Greek word Hades is used, that's how it transliterates it into our English translation. So the King James Version doesn't do that. You just have to be aware of there's two different Greek words that are translated as hell, and you have to be aware of where they're used. But New King James Version, Revelation 20 and verse 13, it says, "The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them, and they were judged each one according to his works." Now notice verse 14. "Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death." So you have this Hadean realm, which evidently is a temporary realm, being destroyed in the end, being thrown into the lake of fire and burned up and destroyed. That's the idea. Same way with death. Physical death is thrown into the lake of fire. It's destroyed. It doesn't exist anymore. And so that kind of indicates to us we're talking about two different places here. It's one of those things in the Bible where you kind of have to read between the lines, but I think there's enough evidence that you can say pretty surely that this place exists, that it's temporary in nature, and again, that it's not the eternal hell that we read about, the lake of fire, where obviously Hades is going to be destroyed. So he's in Hades, Greek word there. And we're already here, so let's just talk about this. He lifts up his eyes, and who does he see?
Abraham, Lazarus.
He sees Abraham and Lazarus. Where are they?
Across the Gulf.
They're in Hades too, aren't they? But are they in the same place he is?
Nope, they're in paradise.
Yeah, they're in a different compartment, right? Bible says there's this great gulf that exists between these two places. Impassable gulf. And so he opens his eyes in Hades and he sees Lazarus and he sees Abraham in his bosom, but they're in a different place than he's in. And so again, what it indicates to me is we're kind of reading about a temporary spiritual place where the souls of men are held, either in reward or punishment until the final day where we go to our eternal destinations, whether it be heaven or hell. But again, it's one of those things that you can spend some time studying it, and sometimes you go in circles, but I think there's enough evidence there to say that with confidence. Go ahead.
You know, just a side note there, that interesting that even in the spiritual realm, he recognized Lazarus and Abraham.
Yeah.
You know, identities are retained and recognizable.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things, or a lot of things that we can learn from this. Some of them very subtle mentions, I think, but again, like Daryl pointed out here, spiritual recognition. I think part of what keeps us from recognizing and even sometimes remembering people who we meet from time to time is our physical body, our brains. That limits us in what we can do and what we can retain, what we do and don't retain. Of course, the Bible teaches us in the spiritual realm. I'm not going to have to look around and say, well, where's God? I don't see him. Point him out to me. I'm going to know. Where's Christ? Where's Abraham? Where's Moses? We're going to recognize everyone and everything instantaneously in the spiritual realm. So that's one of the ways it's going to be different from where we live. Obviously, the rich man had never met physical Abraham. Would you agree with that statement? Yes, he had died hundreds of years before he'd ever even come along. But like Daryl said, he looks across and he knows it's Abraham. So spiritual recognition is there.
Which, speaking of spiritual aspect of it, then Lazarus must have been a spirit also.
Yes.
Obviously. But the rich man was a spirit. What? Correct. So, do spiritual bodies need water to cool their tongue?
No, I think it's just a figure of speech to help us recognize, what was happening. Does a spiritual place of hell need physical fire? No, it's not going to be physical fire like we know, right? But what's one of the worst things you can think of? Burning up. I mean, when you think about pain and you think about misery, burning up, being burned alive would be one of those things I would say, I'd mark that off my list, Avoid that way of dying if possible. And so I think what the Bible does to us, it describes to us things we don't know in terms we can understand. If God were to just come out and describe to us the way the spiritual thing is, we wouldn't have a clue what he's talking about, because the only thing we know is physical. That's the only thing we can relate to. And so we have these physical depictions for us in the Bible, but like you said, we're talking about a spiritual realm. Does the spirit have flesh and bones? No. And we can't comprehend that, can we? I mean, can you comprehend what a spirit is, what a spirit looks like? Only thing I know is flesh and bones, right? Only thing I know is change and aging and, how we all are different, how we're limited. But that's not the spiritual realm. And so it's one of those things that's hard for the human mind to try to comprehend, but it's also one of those areas where we just got to trust God that it's going to be like he told us that it is. Those things he describes are going to be there. And one of the scary things to me about hell is we don't have words or pictures that can adequately describe its misery. They're the worst things that we have, but they're not even close, I think, to the reality of what hell is going to be. But the plus side of that is heaven's that way too. All the things, the best things that we have, whether it be gold or jewels or, the way that heaven is described to us, pure waters, those are pleasant things in our life, but they're not even close to describing the beauty and the glory that heaven is going to hold for us. We don't have things in this life that you can compare to and say they're on the same level as heaven itself. But what God does is takes the best things that we have and uses them to illustrate how good heaven is going to be for us. So it's one of those things where God's got to dumb it down to our level, if that makes any sense. Go ahead, Judy.
Don't you think that that's the reason a lot of people doesn't obey the gospel? They think we're dead, we're just like robots, just dead all over. They don't think we're going to burn.
Yeah, I think there's a,
They don't
yeah.
think it changes.
Yeah, that would be,
Just when we don't.
exactly. And that would be, I mean, that wouldn't be great, I guess, but it'd be better than what the Bible describes. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, I'd rather not exist than exist for eternity and suffer like the Bible depicts to us the punishment of hell. So yeah, I think there's a number of reasons why people don't obey the gospel. But that would be one of them. Yeah, their hope is that they'll just, hell's a myth, something that's made up and doesn't really exist, and when they're done, they're done.
Don't you think that's part of the torment? Is that the rich man can see the other side?
Yeah.
You know,
So
those people that say, in this life, we're going there. They're saying, I don't believe you're dead all over. When they get there, they're going to see the other side. They're going to see that guy that invited to church or their family member that loved them and tried to get them to. That's part of the torment. It's like, I could have had that too. I didn't listen.
yeah, and to me, we're in this. We're vested now, so we'll chase the rabbit, Dennis. We'll go down the hall. But you think about, what could the rich man see?
So paradise.
That's the only thing he saw. There's not any indication that he could see anything else. Could you imagine that for eternity? The only thing you can see is paradise and all the people, enjoying it.
He had to have enough perspective of where he's at to visualize that he was in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, but and I guess what I'm trying to say,
Everybody around him maybe, but.
right.
But
Yeah, and to me, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I'm trying to read between the lines too much, but could he see anybody else? Could he hear anybody else? Was it this sense of you're just in utter darkness and you have these blinders on and you're all alone?
maybe that's just an extension of his own personality from the beginning.
Maybe it is.
He was ever concerned with himself.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be.
You never know.
But, again, you think about being tormented.
Right.
You can never close your eyes. You can never look away. That's all you can ever see and all you can ever think about. And how miserable would that be?
He's still there
Yeah,
today.
exactly. And he's going to be there 1,000 years from now in the same position. So, again, I go back to that idea that we talked about, Danny. The Bible describes to us things in physical terms, but they're not even close to what I think it's really going to be. Go ahead, Daryl.
This whole thing just raises more questions than
It does.
for me. But, I've heard people say, well, we won't recognize or know where our loved ones, families went that didn't make it to heaven. And but Abraham carried on a conversation with the rich man and recognized him clearly.
Yeah.
It was back and forth.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of this thing. Is there any indication in Abraham speaking to him that he had any sympathy for him? No. Would you say Abraham was at peace where the rich man was? Yeah. I would say he was. Kind of indicates that, doesn't it? He just kind of tells him straightforward, listen, you made your bed, you got to lay it. This was your choice. You wanted to be rewarded while you lived here upon this earth, so you got your reward. And now you're reaping the consequences of the choices that you made. So, you do have, like you said, you kind of have that idea, or the questions, at least in our minds as humans, how can you look across and see another individual and be okay with that? But Abraham wasn't he? So it's one of those things where it's really hard to, I don't think we can understand it physically speaking. But we'll understand it one day. We just got to trust God that it's going to be like He told us it was.
You know, you're in the spiritual world. There's just so much we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know that our emotions are the same in the spiritual world as they are in this physical world. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't know.
And that's one of those things. One of the things that we do know is our relationships are going to be different. You know, the physical relationships that we had on this earth are not going to be the same relationships that we have in heaven. And so we know that marriage doesn't exist. They're not going to be husbands and wives in heaven. You know, my wife is my wife here upon this earth, but in heaven, she's not going to be my wife. We're not going to be married in heaven. Our relationship is going to be a changed relationship. And that's hard to understand, isn't it? But I think that's part of the comfort that we'll have is, you know, our Father's going to be there, God. You know, our family's going to be there, our brothers and our sisters in Christ. And so it's kind of hard to put into physical terms and come to grips with it, but I think that's kind of the gist that the Bible tries, or the picture maybe that God tries to paint for us, but yet it's a hard one to understand. Go ahead, brother.
I have to say one thing though about this Rich Man, you know, because he's the bad guy in the story. He gets to do what he should.
Yeah.
He does, and it indicates that we're aware of when you're in the Indian realm. It indicates that you're aware of the physical realm and who has and hasn't died, because it's maybe, let's give him credit for a small redeeming quality. Look, if you can't help me, please help my kinfolk, because they're just like me, and
Yeah.
I don't want them to go through what I'm going through.
Yeah.
So,
So go ahead. Sorry.
It indicates that we know who's died and who hasn't, and are still at least maintain that affinity or affection for people that we do.
Yeah. And here's again, and maybe I'm trying to read between the lines too much, but here's again the kind of the counter that I would offer to that. First of all, maybe only those in misery are aware of their family and their destinations, because his level of concern in a place of punishment for his family, would you say Abraham had the same concern for him? No. He said, you got to resurrect somebody and send them back from the dead. And Abraham said, listen, they've got Moses and the prophets. Okay? They've got what they need to change. If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to listen if God resurrected somebody from the dead and sent them back. So again, you kind of have this weird discrepancy in attitude. You know, he is genuine concern. Like you said, that's I guess there's a positive thing in an eternal place of punishment. that might be it. But he did not want anybody else coming there, did he? And especially anybody in his family. He said, especially my brothers. You know, he knew they weren't there, obviously, but he said, I don't want them to come to this place. You got to do something. And that kind of, you know, it paints to us a picture. Some people have this idea, you know, yeah, I'm going to hell like Adam said, and I'm okay with it. You know, my friends are going to be there. It's going to be great. That's not the biblical picture that you read about. This guy didn't want anybody he knew coming there. And so he was concerned about them, but like it's pointed out, did they have what they need? Did his brothers have what they needed to get to heaven? What do you need to get to heaven? Need God's word, don't you? Yeah. Everybody's got that. And so we've got what we need to get to heaven. It's just our responsibility to make sure we use it and apply it to our lives. And so he wasn't going to make a special exception for this guy's brother. Go ahead, Dennis.
No, this is the only place that mentions Lazarus other than John, where he does die. And exactly what you just said. He comes back, and do they believe? No. Go back
Yeah.
and read in John, where he does come back.
They wanted to kill him again.
So all that happened. So this is speaking of that Lazarus.
You think so?
I think so.
Could be. Could be.
Otherwise, why would he name it? Why would he tell? Because no other place in any of the other things, they always say rich man or poor man or whatever.
Right.
But here he names it.
Could be. I didn't really think of it that way, but
Well, Lazarus wouldn't have known about the rich man based on how I read scripture here, because he's in paradise. He's in comfort. He's not looking across saying, nah, 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 nah.
right.
You know, at the rich man, nor is he saying, oh, I'm so happy that this has happened to him. Because Abraham's speaking for Lazarus.
Yeah, and so that brings up the question: Are those in paradise? And you can counter argue it. I'll do it here in a minute. But like Daryl said, it brings up more questions really than it does answers. Was Lazarus even aware of the rich man? You know.
My personal humble opinion is no.
But Abraham was, and he was in the same place.
He was all on board.
Yeah. So yeah, it's
So then you get into the whole degrees of
exactly.
or the punishment.
Yeah.
And I think you kind of look at the stream of consciousness from here to there. Do you think that's part of your punishment or your reward?
Absolutely. It has to be. I mean, because a guy, you just think about it. I mean, a guy who never heard the gospel of Jesus Christ preached before. And I'm just illustrating extreme examples here. That's how we do stuff to illustrate. So, this guy's never heard the gospel. He winds up in hell. And then you have another guy who heard the gospel, who obeyed the gospel, but fell away. Do you think they're in the same mental state as far as their punishment? I mean, I think the guy who knew and obeyed is going to be a little bit more, mentally in mental anguish than the other guy, because he has to say to himself, man, I was there. I knew what I needed to do. I'd done it. I was living right. But I turned away. And so think about what I threw away. So I think there are degrees of mental anguish and even mental reward.
Like the stars and the crown thing.
Yeah, and it's going to be based, it just makes sense, because it's going to be based upon, in part, what we had to go through to get there. And so you can have a baby who dies, let's just say they're born and day one they die. Are they going to be in heaven? Yeah, their soul's going to be there. Okay, let's take a faithful Christian like Paul, who had to work, who had to, put his life in jeopardy numerous times. You think he's going to have a level of mental gratitude and mental reward that other person's not going to have? They're going to be in the same place.
So you believe that'll continue on?
Yeah, I believe it fully will. And I think that's what the Bible teaches, because it's the suffering and it's all the things we have to go through that contribute to the greatness of heaven. Heaven in and of itself is great. I'm not trying to downplay it in any way, but it's part of the things that we're going to have to endure to get there that's going to make it so rewarding for us. So.
There ain't bad seat in heaven.
Nope, there's not. I'll take any one. I don't have to have the top. So, all right. I know we didn't get hardly anywhere, but it is an interesting story and a lot of concepts, and I think there's a lot of information that's kind of subtly hinted at and given to us.